I was exactly 12 minutes away from authorizing a $150 million federal clean energy contract, the biggest deal in GreenVolt's history, when the door to my office opened without a knock. At first, I thought it was one of the compliance team members. But then I saw him, Daniel Carr, the CEO, and trailing behind him, a woman in a white silk blouse and Valentino heels. She looked like she had just stepped off a magazine cover, not into a boardroom. Her name was Camille. Daniel didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. "Madeline," he started, too casually. "Thank you for everything you've done. But effective immediately, we're transitioning the leadership of the Gate Vera initiative." I blinked. "What do you mean? Transitioning?" He motioned to Camille. "This is Camille Sterling. She'll be taking over from here." Camille smiled like she was posing for a wedding photo. "It's such an honor. I've always admired your work, Madeline. I can't wait to bring a fresh perspective." Fresh perspective? I had led the development of Gate Vera for over 18 months. I wrote the algorithm from scratch. I designed the encryption layers. I negotiated every clause of the contract with the Department of Energy. I was Gate Vera. And now, out of nowhere, I was being replaced mid-deployment by a 29-year-old strategic consultant who happened to be engaged to the CEO's son. My screen was still open, the biometric prompt blinking, waiting for final voice authentication. Daniel didn't realize it yet, but he had just locked himself out of the very system that made this deal possible. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just logged out, left the screen blinking, then stood up, shook Camille's hand, and said one sentence that would haunt them for weeks. "I hope you know what you're stepping into." Because Gate Vera wasn't just a project. It was a fortress. And I was the architect. And without me, they were about to learn what happens when you force out the one person who actually understands how the system works. And trust me, this story is only getting started. My name is Madeline Carter, and for the past 22 years, I was the lead architect behind nearly every major energy deployment at GreenVolt Inc., a mid-sized but fiercely ambitious clean tech firm based in Austin, Texas. I wasn't the face on the billboards. I didn't give TED Talks or charm investors over cocktails. What I did was build. I built systems that worked when the grid collapsed. I negotiated contracts when politicians couldn't agree on where the sun rose. I didn't ask for recognition. I just delivered. Over and over, quietly, reliably. I joined GreenVolt when it was little more than 5 people in a shared office space downtown. Back then, our servers ran hotter than our coffee machine, and every week felt like the company might sink. But we believed in something. We weren't just selling panels or promising net zero dreams. We're building the infrastructure that cities would rely on when the power lines froze or snapped under pressure. By the time we hit our 10th year, I was heading the strategic deployment unit. I had turned down offers from bigger names, Shell, Tesla, even the Department of Energy, because GreenVolt felt like something I helped create, not just a job. A blueprint I had drawn with my own hands. But like any growing company, the higher we climbed, the shinier the leadership became. Suits replaced field engineers. Buzzwords replaced blueprints. And somewhere along the way, what mattered shifted from systems that worked to systems that impressed. Still, I stayed. Even when I saw how the board started favoring younger, flasher hires with empty portfolios and polished smiles. I told myself it was the nature of evolution. And maybe I could evolve with it. Maybe merit would still matter in the end. So I poured myself into Gate Vera. It wasn't just another energy deployment script. It was a protocol designed to securely allocate real-time solar and wind energy across unstable rural grids. A federal contract. Sensitive. High stakes. Months of stress and rewrites and cybersecurity audits. I built it from the ground up with layered verification checkpoints, triple encrypted signature triggers, and a final biometric lock that ensured only the original architect me could authorize completion. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. Because 6 months before, we'd experienced a back-end breach. A zero-day exploit that nearly wiped our contract database. No one on the board wanted to admit how close we came to disaster, but I knew. and I refused to let it happen again. So I added one last line to the code, a silent safeguard, just in case. No one asked me to do it. No one thanked me for doing it either. But I didn't build GateVera to win popularity contests. I built it to protect a system I believed in. A system I thought I was still a part of. Until the day Camille walked in wearing my credentials like an accessory and Daniel Carr told me I'd done enough. They didn't understand what they were walking into. But they were about to. Because legacy doesn't vanish with a demotion. Sometimes, legacy is hidden in the very code they can't rewrite. And as they'd soon discover, you can't replace the architect when you don't even understand the blueprint. The first real crack didn't come with an explosion, it came with a smile. 3 weeks before the day I was replaced, I noticed something strange during a leadership sync meeting. The agenda was vague. Strategic visibility and brand evolution, a phrase that usually meant someone wanted to pitch a rebrand or showcase a flashy new intern with social media credentials. I almost skipped it. But I showed up, coffee in hand, sitting quietly in the back of the executive conference room. That's when I first saw her. Camille Sterling. Introduced as a strategic image consultant on temporary assignment from an external firm, though no one could tell me which firm that was. She was young, maybe late 20s, but carried herself like she had already been named to a 30 under 30 list. Silk blouse, expensive heels, and a confidence that had nothing to do with experience. Daniel Carr introduced her with too much enthusiasm, called her a breath of fresh air and a needed shift in our generational lens. She gave a short presentation on how companies like GreenVolt needed to modernize their narrative by uplifting younger voices at the forefront of innovation. I remember sitting there, listening to buzzwords strung together like beads on a necklace, sessiony but empty. I leaned toward my colleague Brent from IT, whispered, "Do we know what she actually does?" He shook his head. "No one's sure, but rumor is she's dating Logan." Logan, Daniel's son. Recently promoted to director of acquisitions with all the grace of a toddler handed a steering wheel. So that explained it. She wasn't just a consultant, she was future family. Still, I didn't see it coming. Over the next 2 weeks, Camille started showing up everywhere. Board calls, walkthroughs, even internal dev syncs where she had nothing to contribute but always had something to say. She began asking questions about GateVera. Innocent at first. What does the biometric layer do again? Can we simplify the UI for better onboarding optics? Questions that would make sense if you were on the dev team. But she wasn't. Then she started requesting access. Not from me directly, of course. That would be too obvious. She went through Daniel, then legal, then procurement. Her name began appearing in revision threads. Not editing code, but adding commentary on formatting, tone, phrasing. And every time I brought it up, I was told not to overthink it. "She's just helping polish the public-facing side," Daniel said once, waving it off with a chuckle. "You're still leading. We just want her involved early, in case she joins full-time." But I knew the pattern. They weren't asking me to share. They were preparing to replace. One afternoon, I opened the project dashboard and saw her name listed as Strategy Liaison on GateVera's main contract file. She hadn't attended a single meeting with our federal contacts, hadn't participated in any of the late-night compliance rewrites. She didn't even know how to pronounce the name of the rural grid utility we were integrating with. And yet, there she was attached to my work like a ribbon someone ties to a gift they didn't buy. I went to Daniel's office that same day. "Is there something I need to know?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He looked up, smiled vaguely. "You worry too much, Mads. You've always been our foundation. Camille's just helping us modernize the package. You'll always be part of this." But his eyes said something else entirely. "You've already been written out." And somewhere deep inside, I realized. They weren't just adding Camille to the story. They were preparing to hand her the pen. I wish I could say the escalation was sudden, like a thunderclap. Something so loud and clear I couldn't ignore it, but it wasn't. It was quieter than that. Slower. Like the water rising around you inch by inch until one day, your feet can't touch the ground anymore. At first, it was the meeting invites. I'd built the Gatevera deployment roadmap from scratch, every stakeholder sync, every audit deadline, every legal review. I had the full architecture in my head. But then meetings started shifting time slots, and I wasn't included. My calendar used to be booked wall to wall with crucial checkpoints. Now, half empty. When I brought it up, my project coordinator mumbled something about streamlining and smaller breakout teams. Camille, I noticed, was always on the new attendee list. Even for meetings where technical input wasn't just useful, it was necessary. Then came the contract drafts. One morning, I opened the shared document folder and found something strange. A new subfolder labeled Public-Facing Final. Inside, a polished version of the federal agreement, stripped of the technical metadata I had insisted be preserved: timestamps, chain of custody logs, internal cross-references. All gone. Instead, there were flashy infographics, reworded executive summaries, and a bizarre tagline I had never seen before. Gatevera, redefining resilience through feminine innovation. What did that even mean? I scrolled to the contributors list. Kemi Sterling, lead narrative strategist. My name was nowhere. I confronted Daniel in his office later that afternoon. This is not a narrative, it's a binding federal contract. You can't just repackage it like a branding deck, I said, trying and failing to keep my voice from shaking. He leaned back in his chair like he had all the time in the world. Madeline, you're taking this too personally. You've built an incredible system. But we need to think forward now. Gatevera isn't just a tech product, it's a movement. A movement? Number. It was code. It was compliance. It was infrastructure that would crash if even one element fell out of place. But to them, it was a headline, a rebrand opportunity, a chance to market progressiveness by handing the credit to a younger, camera-ready mouthpiece with high heels and a PR team. I knew I was being pushed out. But what made it worse was that they were trying to convince me it wasn't happening. One by one, the systems I had set up were being mirrored, rewritten, or handed off. Camille began forwarding executive summaries to federal contact summaries I hadn't approved. Legal teams stopped looping me in. And when I raised concerns, I was told I was blocking innovation. Blocking. That word stuck like a splinter under the nail. After 22 years, I had become an obstacle. A relic. And yet, none of them noticed the blinking prompt still buried inside the Gatevera terminal, the one that hadn't been touched, hadn't been overridden, and couldn't be reset. Because while they were busy polishing optics and rehearsing launch speeches, I was watching quietly from the sidelines, tracking every misstep, every unauthorized edit, every mispronounced term that passed for leadership. They thought they were streamlining. But really, they were sawing through the last beam holding the structure in place. And eventually, when it all collapsed, they would realize I wasn't the one who made this personal. They were. And I was just getting started. The day it broke me wasn't the day I was pushed out. It was the day I realized no one would say goodbye. I came into the office early that morning, habit, more than anything. The building was quiet. Still, the kind of stillness that usually came during long weekends or weather alerts. But this was a Tuesday. Regular. Ordinary. Except nothing about it was. My badge still worked. For now. When I got to my floor, the lights hadn't even turned on yet. I walked to my desk of nearly 2 decades, only to find a small cardboard box sitting neatly on top. No label. No note. Just a silent instruction. Pack up and leave. My nameplate was already gone. The frosted glass outside my office used to read, Madeline Carter, Senior Director, Systems Engineering. Now it was just blank, as if I had never been there. I opened the top drawer, slowly, half expecting it to scream. Inside, a few pens, a flash drive, a photo of our original team from a company picnic 12 years ago. Everyone was younger then. Greener. Daniel still had a full head of hair, and I was smiling in a way I hadn't in a long time. I sat down one last time, and the silence hit me like a tidal wave. No knock on the door. No one passing by. No awkward, "Hey, are you okay?" Not even the courtesy of a fake smile. The very same people who used to ask me for advice, who came to me in a panic when timeline slipped or code broke or clients balked, those same people were now pretending I didn't exist. They kept their eyes glued to screens that weren't even on. They typed into blank documents just to avoid making eye contact. It wasn't just disrespect. It was erasure. I took a slow breath and turned to my monitor. My login still worked. Out of instinct, I opened GateVera's mainframe, navigated to the terminal log, and stared at the quiet line of code blinking at the bottom of the screen. Biometric authentication pending, origin architect required. The system still knew me, even if no one else did. I logged out. Then I opened my inbox. At the very top sat a new message. From GreenVolt's executive comms team, sent to the entire company. The subject line read, "Welcome Camille Sterling, lead strategist for GateVera." I clicked. There she was seated in my office, holding my coffee mug, smiling into the camera with perfect posture and that same vacant confidence. The caption underneath read, "Camille Sterling takes over final implementation of the groundbreaking GateVera system." No mention of my name. Not even in the footnote. I didn't cry. But something inside me cracked clean, deep, final. Not because they replaced me, but because they pretended I was never there to begin with. I sealed the box, stood up, and walked out. No one followed. No one asked where I was going. And as the elevator doors closed in front of me, I realized what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal, or the politics, or even the public erasure. It was the silence. The kind that screamed in every empty hallway and unread Slack thread. The kind of silence you only get when people have already decided you don't matter anymore. But they were wrong, because the systems still remembered me. And soon, the world would too. That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, the cardboard box still unopened beside me. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. The house was dark, quiet. Too quiet. But not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of quiet that follows collapse. I stared at the floor for a long time. My thoughts had no shape, just flashes of things that used to feel solid. Meetings, contracts, deadlines, names. Now, it all blurred, like smoke from a fire that had already burned itself out. And then, almost without meaning to, I opened my laptop. Not for revenge. Not even for closure. I just needed to remember. I logged into the isolated system partition I'd built 6 months ago, the one GreenVolt never bothered to ask about because it didn't fit into any department's org chart. It was called GateVera R. The R stood for redundancy. But for me, it meant something else. It meant resistance. You see, most people at GreenVolt thought GateVera was just a deployment tool. A sleek interface for coordinating clean energy distribution across government grids. But that was only the outer shell. Beneath it, beneath every GUI and dashboard, they didn't know I had embedded a secondary safeguard. A protocol I wrote myself. After the breach. No one talked about it publicly, but 6 months earlier, GreenVolt suffered a near-catastrophic intrusion attempt. A zero-day exploit hit our internal network. It was stopped before it reached critical systems, but barely. And when I brought it up to Daniel in a board debrief, he brushed it off. "It's under control," he said. "No need to cause panic." But I had panicked. Not outwardly. Not loudly. But deep down, I knew if it happened once, it could happen again, and next time, we might not be so lucky. So I built something. A silent protocol. 3 layers deep. Voice authentication, terminal match, geolocation confirmation, a biometric tripwire embedded into the final execution node of GateVera. Without all 3 conditions met me, voice, my machine, and my physical presence, no deployment could go through. No transfer. No final sign-off. Not even a dry run. I hadn't told anyone. Not because I wanted control, but because I needed assurance, the kind you can't outsource to trust. And now, sitting in the dark, I realized they didn't know. Daniel didn't know. Kemi definitely didn't know. They thought the deal was done. They thought all they needed was a new face and a new headline. But the gate was still locked, and only I had the key. I leaned back, closed the laptop slowly, and exhaled. They had written me out of the story. But they forgot one thing. I didn't just build the system. I was the system. And without the architect, all they had was a blinking cursor. Waiting. Unmoving. Unimpressed by titles or press releases or expensive heels. It was just sitting there. Quiet. Patient. Unbothered. Because the system didn't recognize their names. It only recognized mine. It started with a ping. Not the triumphant chime of a finalized transfer. Not the satisfying click of a system confirming success. No, this sound was different. Hollow. Uneasy. A soft error tone, followed by silence. Then the screen flashed red. Gateway final authorization failed. Environment mismatch. Awaiting origin signature. Camille leaned closer to the monitor, lips pressed into a flat line. She clicked again. Harder this time, like the pressure of her fingertip might somehow rewrite the logic beneath the code. The screen blinked once, then again. Same result. Across the boardroom, Daniel Carr stood motionless, jaw tight, one hand resting on the back of a leather chair. Two junior analysts hovered behind him, whispering in hushed panic. Brent, the head of IT, looked like he hadn't slept in days. It had been 17 minutes since Camille first attempted to authorize the $150 million deployment. 17 minutes of loading screens, network pings, and growing tension. The room smelled of stale coffee and rising fear. Why isn't it going through? Camille finally snapped, turning sharply to Brent. He adjusted his glasses, visibly sweating. The system's recognizing the request, but it's rejecting the execution point. It says the terminal isn't the original node. In English, Daniel barked. Brent swallowed. The final layer of Gate Vera is programmed to only accept authorization from the workstation it was designed on. That means Madeline's machine, her voice, her location. Camille blinked. Well, override it. He hesitated. We can't. The protocol is encrypted at the hardware level. Even duplicating the machine wouldn't bypass the biometric locks. It's frankly bulletproof. Daniel exhaled hard through his nose and turned his back to the room. Nobody spoke. Somewhere, a phone buzzed. No one answered it. Camille stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Her posture faltered, not the confident public speaker from last week's press conference, but a girl in over her head, holding onto a title she didn't earn. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. Because across the city, in my quiet kitchen, I had just received a message. A simple one. From Jacob, the one person from IT who still dared to text me. They're panicking. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my cup of tea and walked toward the window, letting the sunlight hit my face. The system was doing exactly what I designed it to do. It was protecting the integrity of a project I had bled into. It didn't scream. It didn't glitch. It didn't crash. It simply said, number. Not without me. They had tried to cut me out like a loose thread, never realizing I was the seam holding the entire structure together. Now they were tugging at the edges, watching everything unravel in slow motion. And I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to send an angry email. I didn't need to show up at the building with a lawyer and a press badge. All I had to do was wait. Because true power doesn't beg to be noticed. It just waits for the right moment. To let silence become the loudest answer in the room. By sunrise the next morning, the silence had cracked. It started with a headline. GreenVolt faces major system failure amidst Chentoching quantum federal contract. Posted at 6:42 a.m. by Grid Tech Journal, the industry's most trusted energy infrastructure outlet. The subheading hit harder. Sources claim internal mismanagement and unauthorized transitions may have compromised a critical deployment system. At 7:05 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A second article, then a third. Within the hour, the story was everywhere. LinkedIn, Twitter, investor blogs, even a short segment on local news. Screenshots had leaked. Internal Slack messages. It logs. The error report from GateVera's system dashboard. Someone had forwarded the chain of emails, probably Brent, or someone on compliance who knew they were about to be thrown under the bus. The subject line was damning. We can't override Carter's protocol. Contract unexecutable. Keep this internal. But it wasn't internal anymore. By 8:15, GreenVolt's stock price had dipped 3%. Analysts were calling it an avoidable failure of due diligence. Shareholders wanted answers. The Department of Energy requested a formal update. And worst of all for Daniel Carter, our government client, had yet to issue any public comment. Silence from a client that size? That was never a good sign. At 9:03 a.m., Camille attempted to log into the system again from a second terminal this time. A different room, a different machine. Same result. Access denied. Biometric mismatch. Terminal unrecognized. This time, the system logged the attempt as a security flag. Not a failure, a breach attempt. And that was the moment it all flipped. The board was notified. The legal team scrambled. Someone tried to call Mimi old work line, which had already been disconnected. At 10:12 a.m., a new press release dropped not from GreenVolt, but from Grid. Effective immediately, the execution of Project Vera is suspended, pending a full audit of procedural compliance and system security. Concerns have arisen regarding undocumented transitions in leadership and lack of formal handover documentation. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. They said what mattered: undocumented transition. No handover. Suspended. I sat on my balcony with a warm mug of coffee, watching sunlight crawl across the rooftops. I didn't gloat. I didn't grin. I just felt still. Finally, for the first time since being erased from the building, my existence had been acknowledged not by name, not by praise, but by consequence. Back at GreenVolt, panic spread like a virus. PR scrambled to draft a statement. Camille was pulled from all media appearances. Brent was reportedly escorted from the server room by legal. Jacob messaged me again. Internal systems locked down. They're blaming the code. But people are starting to ask who wrote it. And now they knew. Because systems don't build themselves. Legacy doesn't write itself. And when you try to swap out a foundation for a fresher face, you'd better pray the structure doesn't remember who poured the concrete. But GateVera remembered. The logs remembered. The client remembered. And now the world was watching. And that was enough. The email arrived just before noon. Subject: Urgent meeting request. From Daniel Carr. To Madeline Carter at private. Domain. Message: Madeline. We would greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you regarding the current status of GateVera. Please let me know your availability today. Best. Daniel. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a polished sentence dressed as diplomacy-like. I was a misplaced login credential they suddenly remembered they needed. I didn't respond right away. I forwarded the message to Miriam Hensley, my longtime attorney, quiet, sharp, and as unshakable as a safe. She'd been with me through contracts, patents, North Dakota as, and more than one corporate bluff. She replied in less than 10 minutes. Meet me at the office. 3 p.m. You don't go in alone. At 2:58, I stepped into the glass-walled conference room of her firm. Nothing flashy, nothing theatrical. Just clean lines, quiet air, and the scent of ink and consequence. At exactly 3:04, Daniel walked in. No assistant. No PR handler. No tie. Just a man who hadn't slept, whose confidence had been traded for caffeine and a folding briefcase. He reached out his hand. I didn't take it. Thank you for coming, he said, voice low, tight. I didn't come for you, I said. I came to protect the system. He sat down across from me. Miriam slid a folder across the table. Inside, a printed copy of the GateVera security protocol, signed and time-stamped. My name, my code, her signature as witness. He opened it and exhaled. You built something incredibly strong, he said. I built something to last, I corrected. A pause. We need your help, Madeline. There it was. The sentence he'd never imagined he'd say. The client is pulling back. The board is restless. We can't get access to the final node, and Camille, he faltered. Camille isn't ready for this. She never was. Then why replace me? I asked, knowing the answer. He looked down. I made a mistake. I waited. Silence stretched long across the room. We'll authorize a retention bonus, he added quickly, desperate to regain control. We'll reinstate your title, rewrite the announcement. Hell, we'll spin the whole thing as a strategic miscommunication. Miriam cleared her throat. That won't be necessary. Daniel blinked. I leaned forward, voice steady. You didn't just remove me, Daniel. You erased me. You didn't offer me a transition. You didn't hand over the project. You didn't even have the decency to mention my name when announcing the system I built. He tried to speak. I raised a hand. Number. You wanted a future without me. I stood, gathering the folder back into my bag. Now you have it. His voice cracked. Madeline, please, what do I tell the board? I turned to the door, paused with my hand on the handle. Tell them the gate's working exactly as it was designed to. Then I looked him in the eye one last time and said the only thing that needed to be said. Legacy isn't free. And I left. No security escort. No cardboard box. No blinking cursor. Just the quiet click of a door closing behind me. And the knowledge that for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one locked out. They were. The next few days passed in a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. Not the silence of exclusion, but the silence of freedom. I no longer had to check my inbox every 5 minutes. I didn't have to pretend I was okay when a younger executive skimmed my work and called it a great jumping-off point. I didn't have to explain, defend, or justify why I knew what I knew. I just breathed. And for the first time in a long time, the air felt like it belonged to me. The news cycle moved quickly. GreenVolt's stock continued to slide. Camille's name disappeared from the company's social pages. A short press release announced a leadership transition pause and organizational reevaluation. Corporate speak for, we messed up. But I didn't follow it obsessively. I didn't need to, because I wasn't waiting for redemption. I had already earned it quietly, in the systems that worked long after I walked out, and in the people who finally saw it. On the 5th morning after the meeting, my phone buzzed. It was a call I didn't expect. Marcus Levinson, Senior Procurement Director at Constella Grid. The man I had spent half a year negotiating with on early morning Zooms, late-night clause rewrites, and shared spreadsheets that bore the fingerprints of real collaboration. I answered on the 3rd ring. Madeline, he said, his voice calm but resolute. We've reviewed everything. The full logs, the code structure, the metadata trail. We know the truth now. I said nothing. You built GateVera. Not just the system, but the trust. You didn't lock us out, you protected us. That matters more than any rollout timeline. Still, I stayed quiet. We'd like to retain you, he continued. Not as a vendor, not as a contractor. As a strategic partner. Independent. Flexible. With full discretion. We'll draw up the package, but I'll tell you no, it won't look anything like what GreenVolt ever offered you. There was a long pause. Marcus, I said finally, I'm not looking to rebuild what I had. I'm not chasing titles anymore. I know, he said. We're not asking for your old title. We're asking for your judgment. That's what no one else had. I looked out the window. The sun was rising, warm and slow. Birds darted across the morning light, traffic humming far below. "All right," I said quietly. "Send the paperwork." 2 days later, I signed the agreement from a quiet workspace on the east side of the city. No badge. No office politics. No blinking cursors waiting for someone else to approve my authority. Just me. And the kind of work I loved without the noise. That Friday, I returned to my favorite cafe, the one where I had once read headlines about my own erasure. This time, I sat by the window, sipping coffee, not as someone recovering from a collapse, but as someone who had walked out before the fire caught her name. The barista remembered me. "Same table?" she asked, smiling. I nodded. She brought over my drink and then paused. "You look different today," she said. "Lighter, maybe?" I smiled softly. Maybe because I stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. And as the city moved outsider rushing, climbing, crashing, I sat still. Not behind. Not beneath. Just free. The collapse didn't come all at once. It unraveled slowly like a zipper pulled loose, one tooth at a time until everything that held the illusion together fell apart. It began internally. The leadership meeting scheduled for the following Monday was canceled without explanation. The executive Slack channels went quiet. Camille's name disappeared from every project dashboard. Her LinkedIn profile went private. Rumors swirled that she had been placed on indefinite administrative leave. No formal memo, just silence. By Wednesday, anonymous sources leaked screenshots of the gate bearer rejection logs, the failed access attempts, the repeated terminal mismatches, the breach flag. The public could now see what the press had only hinted at. Someone had tried to force their way into a system they didn't understand, and failed. The narrative flipped. The story was no longer about a tech hiccup or an unforeseen deployment delay. Now, it was about arrogance. About the dangers of performative leadership. About what happens when a company chases image over infrastructure. Daniel tried to get ahead of it. He issued a carefully worded statement during a live-streamed investor Q&A, saying, "While GreenVolt remains committed to innovation, recent oversights in procedural documentation have created temporary friction in our execution strategy." It was the kind of sentence built by lawyers and branding consultants. Precise, hollow, and nobody bought it. That same afternoon, Constella Grid made their move. In a short but devastating press release, they announced they would no longer be pursuing partnership with GreenVolt due to irreconcilable concerns regarding transparency and leadership accountability. The final blow came 3 days later. An emergency board meeting was held off camera, behind closed doors, but its outcome was impossible to hide. A new interim CEO was appointed. Not from within. Not from the Carr family. From the outside. Daniel was done. Camille was gone. And the company they had tried to rebrand around buzzwords and bloodlines was now bleeding out in plain sight. I didn't smile when I heard. I didn't cheer. I just let the moment pass. Because none of it had required a fight. I hadn't sabotaged a thing. I hadn't leaked a memo, posted a tweet, or made a scene. All I did was walk away. And let the code speak. Let the system show them who it listened to. And more importantly, who it didn't. The world didn't need me to point fingers. They figured it out themselves. Because the truth always echoes louder in silence. And when you spend more time polishing appearances than protecting foundations, eventually the structure caves under its own weight, under public scrutiny, or under the absence of the one person who actually knew how it was built. In the end, they didn't just lose a contract. They lost something harder to earn back. Credibility. And for once, the headlines weren't about the young visionary strategist or the bold generational shift. They were about the lesson. That legacy isn't defined by who speaks the loudest. It's defined by who held it all together, long before anyone was watching. It's a strange thing, realizing that the end of something doesn't have to feel like loss. Sometimes, it feels like clarity. Like the lights finally coming on in a room you've been fumbling around in for years, believing you were the problem, when all along, it was the darkness. That's what it felt like for me. Not victory. Not revenge. Just understanding. Because somewhere between being erased and becoming essential again, I stopped needing anyone's permission to feel valuable. That was the real win. Not the headlines, or the reinstated credibility, or the email offers I started getting from other firms trying to pick my brain. No, the real triumph was internal. It was learning that when you build something with integrity, with care, with quiet discipline, it doesn't vanish just because someone stops applauding. It stays. In the systems, in the work, in the people who saw you even when the spotlight didn't. For most of my career, I believed that competence would always speak for itself. That showing up early, staying late, delivering without drama, that would be enough. But I've learned that in a world obsessed with optics, real value often goes unnoticed until the lights flicker. And then, suddenly, everyone remembers who knew where the circuit breaker was. So, here's what I'll say. Not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever been overlooked, sidelined, or told politely or otherwise that their time has passed. You are not invisible, even when they pretend you are. Even when they take your seat, your slide deck, your name off the credits. You are not invisible, because the work you've done echoes in places they don't know how to listen to yet. And one day, when the polished words and curated smiles fail, when the system breaks, they'll go looking. And they'll find the fingerprints you left behind. Not loud, not bitter, just steady, unshakable. The kind of legacy you don't need to defend, because it defends itself. People often mistake silence for surrender, but the truth is silence can be strategy. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining and start observing. Let the cracks speak. Let time expose what ego tries to bury. Because real knowledge, real judgment, real value doesn't need noise. It just needs patience. These days, I choose where I spend my time, who I work with, what systems I lend my name to. And when I walk into a room now, I don't need to announce anything. The work does it for me. The calm does it for me. The stillness, the clarity, the absence of need, that is where strength lives. So no, I didn't burn anything down. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't shout. I simply walked away from a place that never deserved the foundation I gave it. And in doing so, I learned this. Build not for applause, but for permanence. And when they forget you, let them, because the structure won't. And in the quiet, after the noise fades, that's where your legacy will still be standing.